Okay, so welcome back to our podcast, Slightly Off Brand. We're actually going to be talking about something a little different today. So, in the past couple episodes, we had talked specifically about company brands like Cracker Barrel and American Eagle. But today, we're actually going to be diving into a topic that I think is really relevant because it's around social media and specifically how organizations choose to express themselves online through social media. So, we're going to talk about how a brand's online presence and how does it mirror their internal culture, why authenticity always wins over being overly polished, and how organizations can use social media to build trust with their clients and customers and not just followers. So, I want to kick it off by really just diving in and asking one of the most basic questions, but how do most organizations think about social media and what do we think is maybe holding them back?
Yeah, I think a lot of brands, a lot of companies use social media and think of social media in terms of marketing, in the what. And they're not really diving into the relationship side of social media and where you can go with that and bringing the feeling of being a client or a customer, the feeling of that brand to it. They're really focused on just the marketing content and showing you this is the what.
Yeah, I see a lot of brands that try to sell things instantly versus building that, just like you said, Callie, relationship. That how am I going to experience this brand? What should I think of when I look and interact with this brand? And there's so many more opportunities to build connections versus push selling immediately. So, yeah, that relationships is like the big golden neon word for this entire social media talk.
Yeah, I agree 100% with both. I would say too, it's very like transactional. For a lot of companies, that's how they see it. We're like, I'll post this sale I'm having on I'm right now or whatever, like this whole thing we're doing in the company, but I feel like they could do so much more.
hmm Yeah, I think, yeah, like, so companies are probably using it more for like promotions versus like Callie and Aaron. I think like what you actually all three alluded to is more of that relationship driven. Do you guys notice? Because we work on both sides of the spectrum where we work with a lot of service based brands versus the consumer based brands. So, like those directly selling to customers versus those that are selling to other businesses. I've noticed a difference in between the two, but what have you guys seen as well?
For B2B brands, I see that social media can be a really great tool to build your own credibility and position yourself as an expert, which builds more trust within your brand with the people that you're trying to talk to. So I'd say B2B, that's a big thing that I see and a really positive thing I see from brands when they're positioning themselves as leaders in the industry. Anybody want to take that B2C side?
Like Francis was saying, in B2C, there are a lot of transactional feeling posts and things like that. But there's also the real opportunity in B2C. You might get a little bit more engagement, you might get a little bit more interaction. And that's a really great opportunity for brands to be able to listen. And the brands that really take advantage of that, I think you see good results.
Yeah. I want to talk about that a little bit more, specifically like the transactional side. Francis, you said that. Callie, you said that. And I think it's really easy for people to see when brands are talking at you instead of with them. And I think that leads to my next question. But what happens when a company's internal culture like genuinely shows up in their social media presence? Like, does that make a difference in engagement and stories? But I would love to dive into that a little bit more.
Absolutely. I think when a brand is really showcasing their culture and someone who's interacting with their social media can feel their values, even if they're not explicitly stated, understand what that company stands for, that company is going to build trust. That company is going to feel transparent. And then, in turn, those clients or customers are going to feel like they know this brand and they can trust this brand. And that it's the right fit for them. They really feel that. I think that's what it all comes down to, the feeling when brands show up and show off their culture in a really authentic way.
Ooh, I think a really good example of that is Patagonia, because I think like if you look at the type of social media that they put out there, I think it does align really well with their internal values. I think that's probably a brand that I think does really well. I have seen Southwest Airlines as well. I think they do a really good job. They have like this employee first type of culture, and I think that really comes through on their social media, and they will use storytelling and humor.
Mhm.
Are there any other examples that you guys feel like do it like really well on social media?
I think one surprising one is the TSA, actually. They use a lot
What?
of humor. Yes, the TSA. They will post things like a video of one of the people who is out there with the bright sticks, and they're kind of guiding the airplanes. Those, I don't know what the job title of that is, but they'll show a video of them playing rock paper scissors like through a window with a kid. But then they'll also bring information to that post, like rock paper scissors. Scissors over 4 inches aren't going to make the cut. Rocks under this size are going to be fine. Paper's always a win for the TSA. So they bring a lot of humor, but they bring information, and it's really humanized. And that is not what you would expect from the TSA. Because for a lot of people, just thinking like, oh, I got to go to the TSA checkpoint, want. But their social media is really funny. I think they have like millions of followers.
That's wild. Okay, seriously, like the TSA genuinely terrifies me.
Yeah.
Anytime I have to travel, I am genuinely terrified. And I am thinking, oh my gosh, like I don't even carry weapons, but I'm still checking to make sure I don't have any weapons. Like I don't even carry any of that. And like the way that they scream at you, shoes off, electronics out. Like seriously, they scare me. So the fact that their social media is like that is really funny.
Yeah. Yep.
And how awesome that they've turned like this inside joke that all of America has, that fear, that kind of nervousness around that. They've used that as a joke and really turned their social media into a thing that people can connect and create about. Yeah, I think that's really funny. I think another brand is Duolingo. There's always
Oh,
this
yes.
inside joke with Duolingo that they're always watching you and waiting for you to, it's a language learning app. They're always waiting for you to do your lessons through Duolingo. And they kind of took that joke and that thing that they were known for, and they used their mascot, and they made a bunch of videos and memes specifically on TikTok that people were able to connect with. And it wasn't necessarily the most positive things. It wasn't like, oh, I learned all of these words. It was just that inside joke of this app is going to remind you constantly to do your language learning. So I think it's really along the lines of that TSA, that they took something that maybe people would joke about or see as a negative and turned it into this positive thing that people were able to connect over. Yeah, hilarious. People love to connect with those like humor-based things. It's a really clever move.
Yeah, a lot of people interacting like in the comments too of like
Yeah.
different like fast food chains fighting each other, like Qdoba
Yeah.
and Chipotle fighting each other, or like McDonald's and Burger King. I'm like,
Oh,
you would
yeah.
have never imagined this would be a thing like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's consumer led. It's like the people are creating that base for you to just launch your platform off of. So it also involves listening to people as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, Erin, you mentioned inside jokes, and we're talking a lot about the internal culture, how companies are using that. I'm going to say that culture to feed into their social media. And I feel like there has to be some culture consistency in terms of knowing what even is that culture. I mean, how can companies do that? Obviously, they need internal alignment somewhere, but like thinking about their values and their leadership, how can companies go about understanding what that internal culture is? Or because I love like that inside jokes. I know I both think we have a ton of inside jokes that have become our culture organically, but I think sometimes that's hard for companies to find and to understand. So any thoughts or suggestions around that?
I feel like a lot of companies that's kind of like a big reason why finding people that fit into your work or work culture is really important, because at the end of the day, like you can't control everything they do, so you have to trust them. So you have to really find somebody who would fit that, kind of visualizing your brand, who would work here and who wouldn't work here.
Yeah. And I think that comes from the top down. The leadership has to be aligned on what's important to them and what they want their culture to be, and they have to live that. and then find the right people who fit, who will also live that. And it's not an easy thing, and it can't be solved with happy hours and ping pong tables necessarily, but it takes time to cultivate cultures within organizations. But once you have it and it's consistent, it's something that can be really great and really worth showing off.
This is a question my father-in-law actually asked, and I want to ask because I think it kind of goes hand in hand. But to what extent are posts on social media the unified expression of an organization's brand? And is it? Can it be?
Yeah, I think what you have on social media, especially nowadays, can be people's first interaction with your brand. Sometimes it's their only interaction with your brand. So, absolutely.
I'm going to second Callie that like first interaction piece. That's really huge with brands. And when we think about the first touch points, that's like one of your first impressions. It's your virtual handshake as you meet people. So making sure that that aligns with what people have heard about you and what you want to be represented as. And that goes through your messaging, what your visuals look like, who else you're connecting with, kind of the news that you're spreading as well. So it's a lot of different facets. And I would say social media is really important for that first impression, but it's also a way that you can tweak your brand to the way that you want it to be as well.
I agree. I kind of like to think of social media as like your brand as a person. And, they literally have their own profile page. So those small micro interactions, they build up and they definitely have an effect in the long term.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's a really smart way to think of it. I mean, if you just go back to sort of the history of social media, it was all based on relationships and connection. And when brands and companies get onto social media, that's exactly what they need to bring it back to as well.
Yeah, I remember like when I first started Boldthink, one of my first blog posts, and I don't know why I remember this, but it was around how companies can use social media. But the analogy that I used was, can you imagine going to a party of like 500 people and you get up on top of a chair and you use a megaphone and you just start talking in a stream and you're not allowing anyone the opportunity to engage back with you? Like, it would be so awkward, right? And I sometimes think that companies do that on social media is they just use the platform as a megaphone to shout things out at their followers instead of trying to have a conversation or invite people to ask questions. I feel like sometimes we do forget about that two-way interaction. It's just as much about listening. And Erin, you said that earlier, but just as much about listening as it is talking. And so my question is, how can companies do that? Is there a strategy or things that they can do to make sure that they're not just using it as a platform to talk about themselves, but they're also, even in a way, they could use it as market research, to be able to like ask opinions and do polls, et cetera. But would love, to toss that back to you guys to get your thoughts on that.
What brands can do is come authentically, come often, come to the conversation, share things that are relevant. When you have good engagement, that's what real success I feel like on social media is more of the quality of engagement you're finding within your post. And using that to listen, it's going to be faster than any survey you put out there. If you're looking back at your social media and you can mine the sentiments, the emotions that are showing up repeatedly, that's going to give you much more of a clear understanding of your customer's experience or the impressions that your followers have, probably more than almost anything else.
And listening when you get engagement. I think a lot of times we like to do A B testing with different things. What are people leaning towards? What are they interacting with? It may not be the thing that you think they would love. But it's really important to actually listen and give that feedback that they're giving for free, give it some merit and really think about, yeah, the way that they're interacting with your post. Comments are super important. Listen to what people are saying. If they're going to take the time to comment on something, that's huge. And just see what their interactions are. The beautiful thing about social media is that we have so many different statistics we can capture with a single post going out. We can see how many people view it, like it, interact with it, all of these things. And if you have that much data at your disposal, you got to know how to use it.
I also think too that I don't know if all companies know this, but the more that your post is interacted with organically, the more it's going to show up in other people's feeds too. So it's
Mhm.
actually a benefit for the company to comment back. Cause I think I've seen that a lot, to where companies will get comments on their posts or questions and they never respond. And that's actually at the detriment to them because that's an opportunity for them to begin that engagement as well.
And I'm going to follow up with that, Teresa. To your point, making sure that your comments back are aligned with what you want to say as well. We've seen a lot of times where people maybe give negative feedback, and you really have to internalize that and figure out how you're going to let your brand interpret it. I think it's really easy to become defensive or put out a message that may not be aligned with your brand to get it out there quickly, but really taking the time to think through those answers and make sure it's the most beneficial thing for your company moving forward is huge.
That brings up another kind of when you were saying negative things. The way that you respond to that is so important, and showing the humility and taking in the different, perspective. We've seen clients that are just like, hey, let's take the whole thing down. And that's not always necessarily the move. It can be a real opportunity to build trust.
Yeah. Because, Callie, what are they looking for? They're looking for somebody to listen. If you're going to take the time to comment, you hope that your comment is read. You don't just want it to go out into the void and never be heard. So taking the time to listen to that feedback usually is a really big move for companies. So
Yep.
100%.
So that leads me to my next bigger question. And the one thing I want to say before I ask this question is by no means me asking this question, we are going to turn this into any sort of political statement or stance. But here's the question, then I'm going to follow up with an example. But what happens when a brand or an organization, business, whatever we're going to call it, takes a stance on some sort of political or social issue online? And we have seen that a lot in the last couple years, specifically with some of like the bigger companies like the Washington Post and Amazon, to where they are almost using their company social media channel as the place to take a stance on something. And I think this is a question that a lot of people have, like, do they or don't they? Like, we have one client who, or I remember like one of her questions was, she had a photo with a political figure. She's like, do I post this on social media? And my response was, I would not, because you are the representative of the organization. And so it's almost like if you do, you are taking that stance as a unified voice for the whole company. So this is a very long-winded follow-up with it. So to recap the question, what happens when brands take a stance? Should they or shouldn't they?
Yeah, it typically is going to be polarizing. That's a reality that the brand is good with and it aligns, but that's far and few between. It's going to be polarizing. You're going to alienate someone. It's a tough tightrope there.
I always think that your audience makes a huge difference here, because sometimes silence isn't the answer either if your audience is expecting one alignment. And I think we've seen this recently in years where people answer silence with kind of the question of, so what side are you on? And, I think if the people who back your brand are so passionate about a certain topic and you are as well, that's alignment, and that may be something that you can bond and connect over. One thing that we say in marketing is that you're never going to please everybody, but you really want to please the people who are interacting with your brand and are brand advocates. So finding that line between what your brand stands for and making sure that that aligns with your audience as well, versus maybe a more personal piece that doesn't play into your brand and would disconnect you from audiences. But it takes a lot of soul searching, I think, to get to that point for your brand, and a lot of thinking to make sure, right, it's not an off the cuff share of a post or repost of something else. You really have to think about it and if it's right for you.
I feel like social media, if you're listening to your audience, you should answer those questions that they're asking, not necessarily like just other political beliefs. There's so many things going on in the world. Not every one of them needs to be answered by you, but just the ones that your followers are really passionate about, because you might lose them if you don't say anything, or they might be like extremely loyal to you just because you said this one thing about this certain opinion.
And politics and current events are so closely tied that sometimes if you aren't speaking on political events that are affecting your day-to-day business, people question your credibility. They're like, hey, are they aware of this? Are they up to date on this? Maybe they don't know what they're talking about as much as I thought they were. So Yeah, you do have to be careful and listen, but also be aware. I don't think it's a time to kind of seal yourself off from everything. You need to be made aware of what's happening that could affect your brand as well. Hey, Teresa, you've been listening the whole time, so I want to hear what you want to say. You're just nodding. I'm like, I want to hear it.
No, it's all such really good feedback because you have said, and not just you, Erin, but like Frances, you said this too, like sometimes silence isn't always the answer. And I think for me, my mind will always go to the opposite because I'm always like, deminimize risk, right? Like, don't talk about it at all. It's like our rules that my family has when we get together for family holidays. We don't talk religion, we don't talk politics. We have very set rules on what we do and don't talk about. And I take that and it bleeds over into the way that I would say I lead business too. Like we just don't talk about those things. So for me, like it's an interesting perspective to hear you both say, well, that might not be the right answer unless like you don't know your audience or you have such a diverse audience. But I think that's a really interesting thought.
I think with that too, it depends on like the age demographic. Because I would say like Gen Z is probably like they love hearing opinions that are
Mhm.
very like extreme.
Okay, I have a quote and I had to look it up to make sure I said it right. It talks about silence in situations. It says, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. It's from Desmond Tutu. And I think it kind of plays into this that if your audience is expecting you to say something and you don't, then they're like, you've chosen your side. So whether you say something or not, you choose a side either way. So being intentional with that choice is important, silence or
Oh,
not.
that's so good. It's like that risk versus reward. So if like a company
Yes.
stays silent on issues that directly relate to its business or its community as a whole, you're saying that silence is sending a message.
And we've seen this. I can't even give you an example of how many brands we've seen where people are like, they didn't say anything about that. Oh, that's a big red flag. So it's kind of funny because if your brand's out there, people are going to talk about it, whether you are shut down and inactive or completely working. So yeah, it is kind of tough, but I think that soul searching, that audience engagement, and really figuring out where you align are important. Because I get the deminimizing risk too. I mean, you don't want to make a move that you think is good and then it hurts your credibility in the long run.
Mm-hmm. It's really, you got to start with like intent and that internal alignment. So is the stance that you're taking consistent with like your brand's like mission and values and the actions? And does it reflect like what the company does internally is what it sounds like, you are saying. Because I think there is this inauthentic is that yeah,
Yeah.
inauthentic. Why can't I say that word? This inauthenticness to where sometimes I think it could just be seen as I'm just doing this for the public just to show face. And so it doesn't actually sound real or legit. Does that question make sense?
I think there are definitely, like, you've almost seen fads. Every brand is posting about this particular opinion or event or whatever. Everybody's posting about it. Everybody's on this one side. But is it really authentic, or does it feel like they have nothing to do with that? Why are they posting that? Is it just so that they seem like they're aligned? Because all their other posts are just about down to business, down to business. And all of a sudden, they're posting celebrating a certain month or an opinion on this political stance, whatever it may be. So if it feels like it's coming out of nowhere, I feel like it can be really inauthentic.
But yeah, and it makes me think of a couple years ago, I saw somebody really dig into a lot of pride campaigns that happened during the summer months. And people were pointing out why this one doesn't feel quite on point. This one actually worked really well. And I think the companies that were representing Pride in the way that their audiences wanted them to be listened to the people who were a part of that group. They put forth content that made sense to their audiences too. It wasn't just a blanket thing that happened. And yeah, it was really intentional. And I think intentionality is like the key word of all of this.
That's a perfect example of that.
So my next question is, are there instances where perhaps speaking out does do more harm than it does do good?
I think it can be detrimental when it's something that's polarizing and it's not the kind of content that your company typically puts out. If you sell donuts or something and your content has been very donut heavy and maybe it's a lot of dad jokes and all of a sudden you're posting very politically charged posts. I mean, everybody loves donuts. You definitely have customers on both sides of the fence And that can be detrimental.
And when you start posting something like that, it's going to set up the expectation for more on either side, right? So you really have to think, is that intentional to what your business stands for? And will you alienate customers by doing that? Now, if you're really focusing in on a group of people and you're going to get a really positive response from them and build more brand loyalty, I think that's a big thing. But alienating people to alienate them based on a single social media post may not be the way you want to go. Francis, I'm kicking it back to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like some companies too, they might not be super political, but then they'll post something about it. And I think the only way it would be kind of accepted if it's something you're doing like a fundraiser or like all the proceeds go to this or something like that. But it has to be based on your target audience and their values too. Because I've seen a lot of makeup brands do that. I think like Rare Beauty did that where she donated all of her proceeds to medical sort of thing. And I feel like it definitely depends on the brand.
Yeah, and what they believe in.
What I think too, if, the one thing I can say is if companies are going to get into that territory where they are going to be speaking on it, I think they need to be prepared to get some backlash because, like we've already said, you're not going to please every person that is following you or listening to you. I think that is something that companies have to be prepared for is if you're going to post, you need to be so confident in your stance and its representation of your internal culture, because that's what you're going to have to stand on and lean into when you do hear some of that backlash, because not everyone's perspective is going to be the same. Everyone's coming at it from their own perceptions and at a different angle. And, however raised or, whatever those values they grew up with, they're going to be different. So if they do that, be prepared for that backlash, because the reason I want to call that out is because there is nothing worse than if you walk backwards on what you said. And I have seen that. I think we've all seen those examples to where someone says something and it's the wait, nope. Okay, just kidding. That's not a representation of our brand. And you walk back on it. That just makes you look like you don't have your stuff together. Like you don't know who you are, right?
Yeah.
Yes, a straight ticket to inauthentic brand messaging. Like, oh boy. And how many times do you see the apology post before you see the actual post? So think about what's going to garner so much more attention that way. Oh my gosh. Every time I'm like, what happened? I'm seeing these apology posts. And then you see the original content that came out.
Yeah, you did not want to see your brand #canceled on Twitter or X.
No.
If you're going to take a stance, please, for the love, be ready to stand on it. Because if you're going to go back on it, you never should have made that in the first place. And we have seen that so much. Like, I feel like in the last few years, I have seen so many apology posts come from CEOs on Instagram and their stories. And it's like these really long-winded posts about it. So it's, interesting.
Another point I want to add to this is that people will also dig through people that are at the company. So everybody who's at your company is representing your brand. We've seen companies get canceled because a specific employee did something. And then you have to navigate all of that. And people are going to look through who you're donating to, like what things your CEO has attended recently. So it's really hard because people have a lot of information at their disposal to make decisions about whether they want to interact with your brand or not. So that's something to consider as well, that it's so much more than just your social media. While social media is a big part of it, it may just be a whole look at your brand that you have to think about when you're thinking about portraying yourself on social media specifically.
What's the word for that? The digital footprint?
Footprint. Like nothing ever goes away from the internet once it's out there. So really think about, what you're posting.
And you're saying that for employees of companies.
Oh, yes. There's a reason that one of the things that people who are hiring do is they look through your social media, because I have seen a lot of people do things on social media that maybe they shouldn't have, or take a very strong stance and have later gotten fired for it, or they have not gotten hired in the first place because of the things they're putting out there. Everybody can see it. So you have to really make sure that even like what your brand champions are posting aligns with your company.
Erin, I have such a big question for you too, because you are opening a can of worms, because this is such fresh territory, I think, especially in the last year. Employees are on their own private time behind their private social media channels, and they are posting. And I'm going to use the most recent example because, Erin, I know you went to Ball State.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yes. So there was an employee, and we're not going to get into the message or anything like that, who had her Facebook accounts. They were private. So you had to be her friend to see what she was posting. But she posted something that was of her own opinion around a political event that had happened that was very personal. And someone took a screenshot of it and it went viral on everything from news outlets to X, to the point to where I want to say even the president commented on it. And they terminated that employee. And so, not that I want to get into this whole topic or debate on this, but I think it's a really interesting conversation on a contract or an agreement between employee company. What protections are in place for both sides so this doesn't happen? And I don't think a lot of companies have any protections for these things at all. Clearly, should there be? Like, do companies need to consider that?
How
That
lucky, you know?
Can
I
of
mean,
worms opened.
it's open. And you never would have thought 10 years ago that you would need to sit down and talk to your employer about their expectations for your personal social media.
Yeah.
I was gonna
It's-
say, like, I feel like, everyone treats the internet like it doesn't really exist. Like, you're someone different online, or who you present yourself to be online, than who you are in real life. Plus, adding on to that, there's so many, like, people who have, like, double accounts, like,
Mhm.
fan accounts, things like that. People who just, like, go on the internet and they have, like, a little troll account into, like, where they actually, like, maybe they do things that are, like, mean. That one documentary of the mom, the
Mhm.
Unknown Number
Yeah.
documentary, like,
Yeah.
things like that, It's just such a, I don't know, that's a really tough question.
It is, because First Amendment rights protect freedom of speech, but at the same point, yeah, do employers have the right to terminate based on negative brand backlash? And I mean, that's going to go to courts. I think it was a Ball State scenario specifically that is being taken through legal process. So that'll be really interesting to see what people say, and it's new territory, like you said, Teresa. So maybe we don't have the best answer at this point. Might have to let the courts decide and see what parts of the Constitution went out over others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's really interesting too, to where I think companies need to start thinking about this. And I think this is going to be a case that is going to be watched really closely because it is going to the courts.
Mhm.
And I know I'm curious on it because that's going to impact everybody. Like, there
Oh,
is
yeah.
not a single person that case is not going to impact. Because I think it's going to set the tone of what do we do on social media now? Like, I have everything on mine private, but obviously that's not going to do me any good if someone decides to take a screenshot of what I've posted. Not that I ever do, but I just think it's going to be the case to watch. And I think that should serve as a warning that if you're going to take a stance, you could be terminated based on what you post and your outside actions, whether you're on company time or not. They need to have that explicitly stated somewhere in an employee handbook to what are the do's and don'ts on social media. Because Indiana is a no, I want to say, like, they can fire you for any reason. Like, you don't have to
At
do
will?
something wrong. At will. Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
at will.
Yes. But not every state's like that. Yeah, it's so interesting. It's uncharted waters at this point, but it also makes you think, like, if your social media is now expanded beyond your own account and what you post to your employees' accounts, that could be tricky. And no matter what happens with that employee, that brand backlash is still there. People are going to have formed an opinion about Ball State one way or the other. And so it's tricky to then navigate it afterwards too and say, okay, what do we have to come back to? What's our core and how do we deal with this situation? So yeah. And I'm sure this is not the first time this has happened and it won't be the last, but I'm interested to see what the rules are going to be going further down the road. And what-
Yeah.
It'll set a legal precedent, and I don't know how many times Hugh Jackman will have to visit again to clean this. No.
Correct. I can tell you which one
Well-
I heard about first. Hugh was everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, if there's one thing that I think listeners can take away from today, it's clear and it's so obvious that social media isn't a marketing channel, but it's really a reflection of your culture. And the way that your brand shows up online says a lot about what's happening inside your organization, both the good and the bad. And I think what we've also talked about today was, when you have that culture and that content like aligned together, it just builds naturally and it feels authentic when you're online. And I think if it's the opposite, people are going to feel that immediately. They're going to see that you're being inauthentic. They're going to see that it's just for public show. And so being sure that companies have that unified voice, that clear sense of purpose, and that genuine transparency, I think is what's going to turn a channel or a feed of posts into a brand that people actually believe in. And I think that when it comes to taking a stance, whether it's political or social or whatever, it's going to come down to that authenticity. And if it's true to who you are, your audience is going to recognize it. So I think this has been an excellent topic. And I feel like there's going to be more to come on this one.